The Super Nintendo was a powerhouse console that served as the continuation of Nintendo's efforts to save the gaming industry, and a direct answer to their major competitor Sega with their Genesis. That era was powerful, a time of badass and downright dirty ad campaigns that intrigued us, made us laugh, and for the first time in a long time gave us a choice on what console we would invest our childhoods into. The games on it were phenomenal, so many great ideas, and some not so great ideas were manifested on the platform, and some of them did well, very well actually. Which is the topic of today's episode, the top 10 best-selling Super Nintendo games. If you're a Super Nintendo fan, you likely already know which games are going to be on this list, so I'm going to try to add my own little flair in the world of trivia and information to hopefully make it a little bit more interesting. With that being said, let's begin. Star Fox is a game that I don't particularly enjoy. In fact, I find it to be quite overrated on the system. It's just not a good time to me. Many people felt that it was cutting edge, and yeah, I'm sure that it was, but in some ways it just felt like a glorified exemplar for the Super FX chip. But I digress. This game was a massive success as a dual venture from Nintendo and Argonaut Software, which likely happened because Argonaut was like, yo dude, your copyright protection sucks, look at this. And Nintendo was like, oh, Karewa Tadashi. And then they brought Argonaut on board to create the chip. The whole game involves the Lilat system and its weird assortment of anthropomorphic problem children. I'm looking at you, Slippy. Anyway, there are two key planets that have significant military strength, Corneria and Venom. The good guys are from Corneria and the bad guys from Venom. The leader of Venom, Andros, is a goon. And he's an angry goon, so he sends his armies to decimate Corneria. So what does Corneria do? They hire mercenaries, specifically Star Fox. A group of 4 R-Wing flying goon asses, Fox McCloud, Peppy Hare, Falco Lombardi, and Slippy Toad. Now this game sold 4 million copies, but it was also bundled with the Super Nintendo in the Super Nintendo Super Set, which not only had Super Mario World, but also Star Fox. It's also a legacy franchise with 9 games in the series. It's no surprise that one of the best fighting games ever manifested on this planet would end up on this list. In fact, it's kind of refreshing to not see the company that owned the console occupying a spot on this list, but don't get used to it. Now the good thing about this is that not only is this not a Nintendo IP, it also wasn't a pack-in, which is what a majority of this list is going to consist of. Now, if you would like for me to do a top 10 list about the non-pack-in bestsellers or even the non-Nintendo bestsellers, please don't hesitate to ask. I don't keep ideas from the Firefighter giveaway community posts, but I do keep all ideas that are mentioned in the comments for the videos. So if you ever want to see something, let me know. I love making these videos for you. Now, Street Fighter 2 is a game that I adore. From the get-go, it came out swinging and stood strong against its competitors. But the one thing that Capcom continuously did was milk that titty dry until all that was left was a Similac sample that you got in the mail 9 years ago, powdered to dust! Street Fighter 2 alone had 7 versions of the same exact game. That's fan service 101 for me, but this particular version, Street Fighter 2 Turbo Hyper Fighting, was awesome for what it was. It's the 3rd version of the original Street Fighter 2. It came out after Champion Edition, and what made Turbo so impressive is that it was faster. And what's even more funny is that it was created due to the fact that someone else did better at their own game, specifically a Taiwanese company, Hung His Enterprise, who made a ROM hack known as Rainbow Edition. If you've ever played it, it's an LSD fever dream. Trust me, don't play it. Street Fighter 2 Turbo sold 4,100,000 copies, and the game itself was ported to 14 different systems throughout time. The Super Nintendo version has the Champion Edition rule set. The Mega Drive has its own version with Street Fighter 2 Special Champion Edition. It was on the Saturn in Japan with Capcom Generations 5, the PS1 with Street Fighter Collection 2. I could go on and on. It's a solid game, always at the top of my favorite fighting games ever. Aria's too. Super Mario World was a legendary game, and when you think back to your childhood, it was likely a game that occupied tons of your time, and then Nintendo released a sequel to it. Yoshi's Island. Development for it started as soon as Super Mario World was completed, and it took 4 years to develop it. And you know, going back and playing it, I find that it did another very important thing. It introduced the concept of being a parent to the world. If you want to know what it's like being a parent for the first 2 years of your child's life, let Baby Mario escape. You're welcome. Speaking of Baby Mario, this is his first appearance, and in the game we play as Yoshi trying to bring Baby Mario to his brother Luigi. But comics kidnap Luigi too. Why? Because Bowser saw the potential of the brothers diddling his shit in the future, so he went straight to the source and tries to kidnap both of them when they're babies. And that's it. Just you playing Yoshi and contending with puzzles and a linear environment for a little bit, and then we win. Now the game sold roughly 4,120,000 copies, but it was a pack-in. One of the weirder things about the Super Nintendo is that it had tons of variances for the run-of-the-mill control deck, and there was a variance that packed it in. Eventually the game would be released on the Game Boy Advance as well. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past was the anticipated Super Nintendo Zelda that everybody wanted. The Legend of Zelda itself was massive. The sequel? It was kind of different, right? Adventure Link is one that not many folks talk about. Then we had A Link to the Past, which was a return back to the top-down world that we first encountered on the NES. In this game, we play as Link, and in true to form to the franchise, we're going after the Pig Boy in both the light and dark worlds, dealing with gimmicks galore, but I didn't mind. I do find this game to be overrated, but again, my opinion is fractional. By the way, did you know that this game is related to Final Fantasy? It's one of those 6 degrees of bacon kind of things, right? Every actor is tied to Kevin Bacon by some number of links. Well, Final Fantasy is linked to A Link to the Past through a competition, and that competition happened through Nintendo Power. If you ever played the original Final Fantasy, there's this rare enemy named Warmech, and should you encounter it, it will fist you so hard you become a human puppet. But if you were to take a picture of Warmech and send it to Nintendo Power, you'd be entered in a contest for placement in an upcoming game. And that winner was Chris Houlihan. He's the namesake of the Chris Houlihan room or the secret room. You might recognize it for saying, "My name is Chris Houlihan, this is my top secret room, keep it between us," okay? Throughout time, A Link to the Past has been released on multiple platforms, the Game Boy Advance in combination with the Four Swords Adventures, the Wii, Wii U, 3DS via the Virtual Console, Nintendo Switch, it was on the SNES Classic, it was basically on everything. In total, it sold 4,610,000 copies. It was also a pack-in. 3 times! Twice for the Super NES control set, and once for the control deck. Fuck. Ooh, a rare game. Not by monetary value, or even availability, but by the company, Rare, which at this point in their lives were finally figuring out how to make video games. When I go back to their NES era, I wonder how they managed to continue to develop games, because some of them are rough. But fortunately, their 16-bit work is significantly better, and I feel they hit their peak in the 64-bit era. But if we return back to Donkey Kong Country, that trilogy was pretty decent on the Super Nintendo. And from a musical standpoint, it has one of the greatest soundtracks I have ever heard in a video game, thanks to David Wise. Now, while the first Donkey Kong Country had Donkey and Diddy, Diddy's Conquest has Diddy and Dixie. Say that 13 times fast. And I don't know where Dixie fits into the entire family. The manual mentions that they're friends, but let's be honest, they're fucking. They're fucking. But I'm not worried about that. No, I'm worried about the prehensile ponytail, brother! Imagine you're just minding your own business, you get choked out by hair. No, thank you. Now, the game itself is basically the same thing as the first game outside of a few mechanic changes, and that's something you'll see quite often with the trilogy on the Super Nintendo. What I did enjoy were the various bonus stages, the music, and the artwork. It's nice, but to me, this is just a sample of the collectathon bullshit that Rare would send our way in the future. Diddy's Conquest sold roughly 5,150,000 titles through its run. What Donkey Kong Country game is your favorite? Feel free to let me know down below. Where Street Fighter II Turbo sold tons of games during its release, the vanilla game did even more. Now, when you think of the World Warrior, it's the original run of Street Fighter II, which took the video game industry by storm. Prior to Street Fighter II, the tournament fighter genre was exceptionally hit or miss. I've actually covered it during the Ready Go Gaming show all about the fighting genre. I'll link it down below if you want to check it out. Street Fighter 2 was on anything that could run it. It was in the arcades, the Super Nintendo. In 1992 alone, it was released on 6 different home computers. Even the ZX Spectrum! Look at these high-quality graphics! Holy shit! Street Fighter 2 carried over Ryu, Ken, and Sagat, but the rest of the fighters are new and they all had their own little gimmicks and people ate it up. At least 6,300,000 copies were sold, which is funny considering if Capcom had the ability to, they'd likely make that many variants of it. I'm telling you, they beat this shit into the ground. It also was a pack-in game, but I can't find any evidence that it was packed in the US region, so I think it was a PAL or Japanese exclusive in that regard. Super Mario Kart was born from the idea that they wanted to have more than one person able to race in a racing game. In F-Zero, if you ever played it, you notice that it's a single-player game, so how do we fix that? We utilize the power of Mode 7 and offer a horizontal break right down the middle, affording the opportunity for 2 people to enjoy racing. Now, this game alone was responsible for firing off the kart racer phase, and it walked so that Diddy Kong Racing, Crash Team Racing, and more could run. And it's a product of its time as well. I'm not a huge fan of it in the slightest. To me, it feels more like a stationary car and the world is moving around it, which threw me off. But the game itself is technologically impressive. You might not know, but those sprites were rendered from 16 different angles. That's how you're able to see that pseudo 3D effect, and I think they did it well. And as to be expected, Super Mario Kart was packed in with Super Mario World for the Super NES Superset as well. We covered the second game, but the first game sold significantly more than the sequel, and that's likely because Nintendo and Rare put out $16 million in ad revenue alone to make the game stand out. This was the era of Sega and Nintendo dragging their nuts across each other's foreheads. So with that came tons of money in the advertising department, trust me, shit ton. But this game alone, it was powerful. It had amazing sprite work. It was fairly responsive as a platformer, and it was a continuation of a well-known Nintendo IP on a next-generation console, so it was already destined for greatness. But I don't know if Nintendo expected it to sell 9,300,000 copies. In fact, it was so successful that Nintendo was able to use that revenue to buy a minority stake in Rare as a company, thus making them a second-party developer. Think Naughty Dog and Sony. Much like Donkey Kong Country 2, this one is just a massive collectathon, but it was a popular one, and that's why it's the 3rd highest selling Super Nintendo game ever. It was also packed in as the Super Nintendo Donkey Kong set, so that probably helped as well. When you think of compilations, you think of more bang for your buck, right? And you'd be right. I'm a huge fan of compilations, especially in a modern collecting world, because those titles individually can cost more than the collection itself. You just kind of have to hope that the compilation does the source material justice. Because for whatever reason, if it doesn't, you betray the trust of your consumers. Nintendo did it right by combining Super Mario Bros. 1 through 3, giving it a facelift, and putting it on the Super Nintendo under the moniker of Super Mario All-Stars. But there was this mysterious 4th game, the Lost Levels. What the fuck are those? Well, it's the Japanese version of Super Mario Bros. 2, the version that we never received in America. And for many people, this was the first time they were able to experience that. I love this compilation because it's literally a 16-bit update to some of my favorite games on the NES, period. And if you're feeling really spicy, you could buy the Super Mario All-Stars plus Super Mario World cartridge and have tons of history in one tiny little cartridge. Sign me up. Super Mario All-Stars alone sold 10,550,000 copies during its run and remains one of the coolest compilations I've ever come across in my life. And here we are, the highest selling Super Nintendo game ever, Super Mario World. Now this was a long anticipated game. Like I mentioned before in countless videos, Nintendo played a significant role in protecting and revitalizing the video game industry in a post-crash environment. Their contributions with Mario alone renewed consumer confidence and proved that they were capable of being efficient game developers. With that, people were ready to see what the Super Nintendo was capable of, and what better way to do it than create a Mario title on the Super Nintendo. And while we're at it, let's make it a launch title. As a game, Super Mario World was dramatically different from its predecessors. Mario felt more alive than just a 8-bit sprite. He had personality, he had fluid movement. And the game did have some cutscenes, at least after beating a Koopling. It was also the first time we would see Yoshi. All in all, Super Mario World sold 20,610,000 copies, a margin that really no other game was capable of reaching, because Super Mario World was packed in so often that it was almost impossible not to own Super Mario World. It was packed in over 11 times during its history. And those are the top 10 highest selling Super Nintendo games ever. How'd you feel about this list? Do you remember opening up any of these games during your childhood? Feel free to let me know down below. One of the joys of what I do here every day is learning from your experiences and enjoying them vicariously through you. I look forward to hearing about it, and I know others will as well. By the way, if you made it to the end of this video, you're already home in our community. We're a group of phenomenal people who just love remembering a time when life was just a little bit easier to live. And it helps that we love video games too. I'd love to have you here. Finally, the single most important thing that you can do for me is to hit that thumbs up button, as it directly impacts the visibility of the videos and projects that I work on every single day. As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes, Fortefyre out.